Welcome to the Family Picture Podcast. This is Michael Branson Smith, and I'm with Jim Groom.
Hi, hello.
And we're back recovering after a long absence with the Karate Kid, because it's about, making a new moment in your life. We've traveled. We're traveling, about to be traveling. I'm going to be moving very soon, so you won't see this environment soon enough. But while we're here, let's talk about the film that was directed by the man who created Rocky. And it's like, well, why don't I make Rocky again with like the equivalent of a 15-year-old boy who's actually 21?
I did not know this until I had done the research and you'd written in the notes that the person who directed Rocky directed Karate Kid. That's just insane to me.
Yeah. So John Avildsen was pitched to do this film. It's like, let's literally because it's kind of like, hey, can you do a Rocky for this sport? Hey, can you do a Rocky for this? That was like the next 20 years of sports cinema, basically. It's very true. And but the script is, I think, what is what's so important here is Robert Mark Kamen, who, he wrote Taps, which is a favorite film of mine, early Tom Cruise, military boarding school film. And he actually goes on to do a bunch of work with Luc Besson and The Fifth Element and Transporter. He even wrote The Fugitive with Luc Besson. So, but this film was inspired by his own experience. In the 60s, he was a bullied little kid, growing up in the neighborhoods of New York. And he decided he wanted to learn karate. He was like 17 at the time. And his first sensei was the crease guy, right? Like strike fast, strike first, no
What's
mercy.
His name again?
Crease. That's Martin Kove.
Martin Kove.
Okay.
And he's called Crease. That's his name in the thing. His name is Crease.
Yeah. So he had a crease character in his life, and he didn't think it didn't stick. And he found a second sensei that was a Miyagi, who had a similar background, where someone who came from Okinawa and was instructed on this defense-styled karate that was built around like balance in one's life and whatnot. And so there's a lot of interesting materials out there about the casting of this film, and Ralph Macchio and Pat Morita, who plays Mr. Miyagi, was known as who?
He's from Happy Days.
Yeah, right?
I mean, that's crazy to think. I didn't remember him from Happy Days. Right. But now reading up on it, I'm like, oh, that's right. He was in Happy Days.
Yeah, he was Arnold, right? He was basically the cook / owner of the principal set of the show, other than like the Cunningham's home, right? But I think so much of the action and plot of that incredibly famous series with Ron Howard and Henry Winkler was set in Arnold's shop, right?
Absolutely.
And he was a comedian, and he was incredibly respected for his, character work as a comic. And he was on the, Tonight Shows, or not Johnny Carson, but more like David Letterman and many, many other things. And he even did Sanford and Son, and he tells a great story about meeting Red Fox for a first time and introducing himself. And Red Fox, being typical like comic ass, like saying, you need a better Japanese name. It was like something like Toyota or and he's just cracking up about how he just had this funky early start. And so the casting of this, they talk a lot about, and how Ralph Macchio, he'd only done The Outsiders. He had been in one other small film. And he goes to his apartment, and what do you think of Ralph Macchio? You first. I want to hear what you're thinking is like his performance as like this kid, and it's not clear to me. What did you find out? Is he are his parents divorced, or is his mom a widower?
It's never clear. Like, that's a really good question. I think about it all the time. They never mention the dad once.
Yeah. And so, in an interview, there's a really good 2005 documentary about the making of the Karate Kid, which is interesting because it's pre-Cobra Kai, right? So
interesting.
Yeah, and Billy Zabka, who plays Johnny, his interview is my favorite probably out of it. He's like really articulate about, and there's a lot of interesting things he has to say about his character. But yeah, what did you think of like Ralph Macchio and sorry. So the reason I brought it up is that the director is talking about one of the scenes, and it's in his audition tape with Ralph Macchio. He's telling him they're divorced. So I think it's divorced because the director says they're divorced. But that seems surprising, right?
Yeah.
I think he's dead because he would, like, Ralph Macchio would be trying to reach out or talk about his dad, you would think, right?
Yeah. I mean, and there obviously the clean replacement of Miyagi for his dad, right? And the mom, and like that all seems good. But like Ralph Macchio or Macchio, he grows on me on this. Beginning with his kind of like, Newark and his strong accent.
Yeah.
I was like, it's kind of, again, another one of those, caricatures. But he really grows on me over the course of the film. In fact, that's the story of the film for me. The story of the film is as it progresses, right? What seems almost kind of, a cliche story, through the small elements of the film and the characters, it really becomes a powerful film about this guy's journey or this kid's journey, to being accepted. It's very simple. Like I don't want to get ahead of myself with talking about the film, but like, it's a simple story, just like Rocky. But it is powerful about how he progresses along the way with his relationship with Marita or Miyagi, his mom, who's great, Elizabeth Shue, who's great, and even the Cobra Kai folks who are great. So it's just it's a whole bunch of great characters.
The frat boy Cobra Kai's, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I too, it's like I was so struck by Ralph Macchio's performance, and like he does this thing where he can be super vulnerable, but also be tough and inquisitive, and it's very, very natural. And it's kind of remarkable that, so, he and Pat Morita, and, this documentary about the making of the film that was from 2005. And it's sad because it was really right before Pat Morita died. So it's very worth watching. It's on YouTube. And he said that their connection was really earnest and honest. Like they, as actors, connected really, really well. And so these scenes that we're going to talk about and how they have these, it's mentor-mentee or father-son, however you want to describe it. And I think that's ultimately what makes this a quote-unquote family picture, besides, understanding I think even though it's a very small portion of the plot, I think the single mom portion of the plot is still incredibly interesting and powerful. Like the relationship between Danny LaRusso and his mom, played by Randy Heller as Lucille LaRusso, and she's fucking awesome.
She's amazing. I love her character.
And she is a TV rock star. Like she has literally been acting in television for 50 years. And, starting with shows like, you remember the medical procedure Quincy, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
MD. And then going to Night Court, the show Fame, Murder, She Wrote, ER, Felicity, and, obviously took part in Cobra Kai, but her probably most recent, most famous film that she became kind of a cult character was from Mad Men. And
who was she in Mad Men?
She's oh fuck, what's her name? She is the Miss Blankenship. So she is the new secretary for and that is thrust upon John Hamm's character. I'm blanking on his name.
Okay, I got to look that up. That's crazy.
Well, there's a link in it. Look at our docs. There's a link in every scene she's ever been in, and she's playing this like really bumbly new secretary, and she's remarkable, and it's just really, really funny. And so she's just like a stalwart, and I appreciate so much about movies that like have these like stalwart actors that they're just workmanlike, literally, but they're just so good and so important to holding films together. And ultimately, I mean, you could say the same about Martin Kove, who plays John Kreese, like the Darth Vader of the Cobra Kai universe, right? because he was also a really well-known TV actor, playing a detective on Cagney and Lacey for quite some time. But let's start with Danny and Ma. How would you describe Danny's relationship with his mother?
I think it's, I mean, almost like they're equals, right? I
Yeah.
mean, they're like, they really have a mutual respect. They obviously love each other. You know, he's kind of like, you bringing me out across the country. I don't know what's going to happen here, but he seems to also trust her.
Right.
And he knows that they have to do what they have to do because she's
Right.
also going to put food on the table. So, I mean, there's a lot to like about their relationship. And it's a pretty honest relationship.
Yeah, I mean, from the like, he's still a teenager, obviously, and giving his mother shit here and there, and like wisecracking. I think a bunch of like, so the film opens with them, driving cross country in the station wagon, harking back Vacation, and
Yeah.
they're in a station wagon. Like, how many station wagons were stick, right? Like, were manual transmission. Like, there's got to be like a dozen remaining
I
on the
had
planet.
a pickup truck
Yeah.
I think it was an 80s pickup truck, and it was called a 3 on the tree. So
Okay.
you had basically, it was basically reverse, first, second, and then third. And it was
So you still had
on
a
the
clutch
steering
that
column.
you still had to push a clutch in then to switch
Absolutely.
gears. All
It
right.
was a clutch, just that. I've never seen it in the station wagon, but I'm sure it existed.
Yeah, because it must have been, because it's not like you get the sense that they're shifting gears in the classical right hand to the right of your hip. And so, but the great thing is it's super old school. It's got you got to start the car in second gear every once in a while, right? Because the clutch is slipping.
I think that's one of my favorite scenes with Mother is when she's going with Danny to pick up, on the date, not to get too far ahead.
With Elizabeth Shue, the
And
Alan
they
Mills
have
character.
to do this, right?
Yeah.
And what could be more embarrassing?
No
than
kidding.
Your mom being like, "All right, when I say pop, go," and there's the rich house. And they're obviously not. So it's great.
Yeah, no, it's super wonderful, and just like, they show up to this apartment building that has a pool, but it's not really pool. It's obviously not even full, and they're in this furnished apartment, so they literally have like so little stuff. It's kind of hilarious, but you get a sense that they establish Danny as a good kid, right? It's like, even though like he has all the reasons to be pissed off, and I imagine back in Newark, I mean, he's surrounded by a lot of neighborhood kids as they're leaving, so maybe they were a well-liked family. Otherwise, like, that kid would, in New York, you would think, be getting his ass handed to him on a regular basis because he's so small and whatnot. But he's like a good kid, and he's bringing the dog water. That the cranky like neighbor, the woman who's sitting by the pool, even though the pool's empty.
Now,
and
go ahead.
Yeah, so these kind of like little moments I love in films where they establish character, right? With these like, oh, he meets a new kid in the building, and he has a short, fast friendship that leads to a party on the beach, but it's not because of him that it's not his failings.
Did you recognize, or did you notice that kid's shirt?
The friend?
The friend who is in
Yeah, you mentioned, what was it?
So it was 2 pigs copulating, and it said, making bacon.
I missed that.
So the other thing, too, about just that scene, I mean, that is a classic California, like, low rent setup. When I moved to California in the early 90s, and I spent 7 years there, I had an apartment in something like that. It is very similar to Danny and his mother's apartment. And it was kind of really interesting to me to see that because, I'll talk about it a little bit later on, but, as a New Yorker, dreaming, I was a skateboarder, and I had my brother was a surfer. And so we were New Yorkers, but we were kind of aspiring Californians, right?
Okay, yeah.
To be skateboarders. We loved that lifestyle, that idea of the eternal summer. Really exciting. So a film like Karate Kid, amongst others, was a kind of like peephole in to a
Right.
completely different world. And
Right.
that was a powerful draw of this film for me.
Yeah. I mean, it's very different. I mean, I mean, you think of like uh, Fast Times at Ridgemont High, right? One of those other glimpses, but it's definitely a bit grittier, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think this is something that Hollywood did so well, which is like create this aura, the way that they did with New York, obviously as well. But Hollywood is very different because it's so big and there's so many different spaces and you really don't know how it works at all. And I think that's there's two really, I think, great scenes for me with the LaRusso mom and son. One is when he first goes to the Cobra Kai dojo and realizes Johnny's there and he's like, oh fuck, I can't be part of this place, right? And so he meets his mom in this restaurant and there's two things going on here. One, it's like we're suddenly realizing like, wait, her job in computers isn't necessarily going to be happening, and she's like now going into managerial training, and you're like, oh fuck, this group is like on the edge, right? They're in a dicey, probably financial situation, but at the same time, they're not like throwing shade at it and being really down in the mouth or anything, and she's peppering him with questions, and he's kind of pushing her back at first, but then she asks him about any girls out there, and he starts thinking about the Elizabeth Shue character, Allie. And my favorite thing is like, so is she as cute as, what is it, Judy? And she's like, oh, Judy's like nothing. Like he like totally. So they obviously have this rapport about talking about each other's experiences in life, right? And that's where you're talking about that. I mean, obviously it's mother son, but they in their way find their way to be kind of peers with one another, right?
Yeah, and I think there's also some sophisticated, like multi-level action happening in that scene where they're talking, and then behind them on the street outside of the dojo of Cobra Kai, which they had gone into, you see the Cobra Kai kids come out, see him, and then obviously like kind of seem to be planning something, to get him. So like it's an interesting scene because I love the scenes with the mom because she's just a compelling. She's like a cool mom, she's like loving.
Yeah,
she wants to see him succeed. She's worried about him, but she's also not overbearing.
No,
and then there's like obviously these assholes at this dojo who want to just beat the shit out of him every chance they get, which is another thing about this movie. Like Danny takes beating after beating.
He's like the Les Nessman of WKRP. He's literally got a bandage on him in every scene, right? That's like true. It's like there's something else fucked up in his face, right? He's just like, what the hell? And it's after one of these beatings, I think, is probably my favorite scene when he takes the beating post, like they literally the Cobra Kai's on their motorbikes, drive him off literally a cliff, right, while he's riding his bike, and they literally throw him off a cliff. I mean, or more like a hill, so he's not like to his death into rocks or anything. And he comes home, and it's like he literally tosses his bike into the dumpster, and his mom happens to hear this and comes outside, and he's really freaking out, and he's like saying, I don't know the rules, Ma. And he's doing his Ma thing. I don't get it, Ma. We need to just go home, Ma. And she's just trying to like hold it together. And, it's kind of miraculous that she doesn't freak out herself, right? She's apologetic, but she's not angry, right? And in those situations, I think like, maternal characters, they can only take so much when they have so much shit on their shoulders, right? And they're dealing with so much, like where's this food coming from? Where, my son's getting his ass kicked. What the fuck? This is all my fault, And the fact that the way that they handle that and her character handles that speaks to what you're describing. Like there's something exceptional about her ultimately.
Yeah, I mean, I also think there's something exceptional about the way in which the film kind of captures it. Like, I'm not going to say like this is verisimilitude. Like we talked about that with Firstborn and how it was similar. Like it's not the same, but there is like the courtyard of this California place. The fact that they're in Reseda, You know,
Yeah.
the fact that we start to introduce this whole social class system, which we'll see as Ali, we get to see Ali's house, and she's very wealthy, and
Right.
you get the sense that the Cobra Kai kids all come from money. And
Right.
so Danny is actually working against not only a brand new environment, but obviously, you know, being kind of, you know, down and out compared to everyone else in Encino versus Reseda. And I love it because that's a, you know, constant recurring trope in 80s films, right? Is
Right.
the haves and have-nots, the rich
Right.
kids and the poor kids. And the poor kids are always the kind of, you know, they have a heart of gold and they're going to
Right.
overcome like Rocky. So
Every John Hughes film too, right?
Exactly. Like
Yeah.
this is an absolute cliche, but it's not cliche in the way in which Danny and his mom play it.
Yeah, and also, I mean, that speaks to like, I think this is going back to John Kamen, the writer, like this is his, it's part his story. He says as much, like this is part his story, and I think so much of that speaks to that generation is like they went through a lot of shit growing up, right? Like, and I think there's a lot about, you know, and this starts to go into Miyagi, his character soon, is like this notion of growing up dealing with adverse social situations where there aren't parents intervening and talking about your trauma and helping you not be a bully and where is this coming from, and you know, no one's psychologizing this. It's just you got to be fucking, it's on you to deal with this, figure it out. And you're also likely someone who grew up doing some sort of physical labor as a job since you were like 13 years old or something, you know, and that which jumps into like this idea of the Miyagi character, and which he's originally introduced, you know, as the guy who's, you know, the handyman of the building, and clearly not doing his best job because the pool is a shit show, right? And when Danny is first asked to meet him, it's because the sink is busted, right? And the way he responds to Danny is really great. I love how he's just like, "So you're gonna come fix it?" He's like, "Later." He's like, "What? When?" He's just like, "Fuck off, man! I'm trying to catch this fly with my chopsticks."
Well, I mean, the other thing too is, right, like he's in this little back room, right? And there's that whole idea of you had an apartment building with a caretaker. Right. And it's in that regard, it's somewhat believable. And then he comes up and he does fix the thing. And
he's the super.
You know, his big thing too. Yeah, he's the super. But his big thing too is you talked about that scene when Danny gets all frustrated and he throws his bike in the dumpster. Right.
Yeah.
And like that's just kind of, he's done. And, you know, he's getting his ass kicked a couple of times by then. And Miyagi fixes the bike, you know, and Miyagi's obviously got skills. Right.
Yeah.
He probably could fix this place up to the degree, but there's a certain part of him that's uninterested in that. Like, you know, he's this kind of Zen master, right? He's all about balance and bonsai trees, and there's a kind of a real bonding around that trees, both with Danny but also with his mom. So there's that trust.
It's such a good scene.
It's a great scene.
It's like remarkable how like he just quickly accepts him. It's like, oh, you're not an asshole teenager, right? And he can read that immediately, and he's willing to embrace his curiosity, right? It's like, what are these? These are cool. And he's like, and it's kind of interesting because we find out later on like his history, and there's reason. He has very good reason to just like want to basically say fuck off to anybody, right? You know, because of what happened with his wife, which we'll talk about later. And that's in part Pat Morita's real history too, which is kind of remarkable if you think about it, right? And so, yeah, I mean, there's this cautious openness to him that I think is interesting in the context of this is something that, I mean, the idea of boys, and this happens in like, so first it's his workspace as the super, but then it becomes his space as his actual home, right? That's behind like a bunch of oil drilling places.
Yeah, that space is great.
And this is something oddly like I experienced as a kid of a single mom, and there were these programs to try to get boys, an opportunity to be with men and learn how to be a man, right? And it was called Big Brothers, right? And one of the things I always remember being so awkward, and they play this so well in the film too, is like being this boy entering this man's space, right? They talk about in this day and age the ideas of man caves and like how they're not to be accessed by anybody other than that person because it's designed and created as just theirs, and it's very intimidating ultimately. And I think that's what we are seeing here, both when he first enters his house and but prior to that entering his workspace. It's like he's like really hesitant. Like you this is the default posture of a boy entering a man's space, is you should be on guard and like expect to be, chuffed at, like yelled at, or like fuck off, that kind of situation.
It's interesting too, because when they go to the space, they cross the tracks very explicitly. And, Danny says, "Oh, are you in the oil business too?" Because behind all these oil, it's kind of like almost like a Signal Hill, if you know that. It's in Long Beach, California. It's got all these oil pumps. I actually, when I was living in Long Beach, California, I had a girlfriend at the time who, lived in this industrial part of Long Beach, and there was this laundromat. And behind the laundromat, similar in some ways to this, there was this little house surrounded by these companies. And it was a kind of cool house, not necessarily as awesome as Miyagi's, but like, you had space. I could work on cars there, right? And you had this kind of like little nestled place. It was a little scary at night because everyone went home and we were in this industrial center. But like that space, Miyagi's space, reminded me a lot of that space in Long Beach that we had. And a lot of the spaces of this film, again, being a New Yorker, seeing it for the first time in the 80s, but then going to California in the 90s, Karate Kid, provides a little bit of the kind of, these space, like the arcade, right? Water slide arcade mini golf. Like,
that's like a fantasy. Combo. Yeah, like you're like, as a teenager in the 80s, you'd be like, oh my God, you get to do what on the weekends?
Exactly.
And you get to, and it's warm all year round. You can do this any day of the week.
So good. And, they had obviously that space. When I went to California and I was like 90, 91, there was a place in Westminster. So not in the valley like this is, but down in Orange County, south of Long Beach and Seal Beach, there was a place very similar. And so I went to it. I would play Smash TV, which was a kind of really cool video game with my brother because we really like video games. But did you notice in this, and this is my aside, and then I'll bring us back to the discussion, did you notice that 1976 clay pigeon game that they were playing, the shooter game? That thing is epic. I've never seen one in the wild.
Yeah, and the hockey too, like with the hockey, like those games like that are mechanical, right? They're not video games. They're proto video games. There's like electronic components that keep score and stuff like that, and there's sensors and stuff like that, but it's still very mechanical, which is remarkable, right?
Yeah, I love that because it was 84 video game kind of golden age, but you had all these older games too.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so, there's this interesting rapport that is established with the bonsai tree scene, and where not only is Daniel invited to participate, but he also immediately is like saying, a willing student and a willing teacher is created immediately, right? He's like, see the tree however you want to see it, be whatever it, and then keep that picture in your mind. And he's like, how do I know it's the right one? It's like, it's what you saw, so of course it's right. And he's like, dude, I'm going to be someone who thinks you should be whoever you think you should be, right? And that's pretty cool. And so they established that relationship very quickly. But the real, like, true familiarity is established when he finally defends him. I actually love, let's back that up. It's like, so he's getting beat up and he doesn't want to, like, he's afraid. He's starting to hang out with Mr. Miyagi now, right? Like, he's like regularly coming, and they do a little time jump, and it's Halloween, right? So because we get a sense like, oh, they must have shown up, and like end of summer, and now we're jumping up to October. Though when it's California, you can't fucking tell what time of year it is ever because there's no season changes, right? And so the pumpkins are the indicator, and there's a Halloween dance. And he's like, I'm not going. Like, these people are all like, I got screwed on the soccer tryouts. I got, my ass kicked on the beach. I got thrown down a hill. I'm like, I am steering clear. Let's hang out in your little workshop.
And he doesn't want to deal with anybody. Like, even when, Allie's like, let's go to the arcade. He's like, and he sees the other people and he like runs away. And, he gets mad at her for like, and he's just like afraid. Like, he's running scared.
He's literally taken like multiple, hits to the face with either kicks or punches. Like, it's understandable, ultimately. And, so he creates probably one of the best props for a costume ever. He basically creates a shower curtain out of this brass hoop. And so he goes, incognito to the party, and Allie comes into the shower with him, basically, which is like kind of like wonderful preteen, like a fantasy, right? It's like, I have my girlfriend in the shower with me. Oh my God. And what a wonderful way to pull that off and it actually not be, sexual in a sense, which is kind of awesome. Just clever writing and production design. Totally. And, but it's after this scene where he finally pulls a prank and he gets Johnny all wet while he's
a shower of his own and stuff.
Yeah, and it's while he's like totally like rolling a joint and about to light it up.
Which made me like Johnny.
Yeah,
Johnny's sitting there smoking a joint.
We haven't talked about Johnny yet, and we're gonna get there because there's so much about Johnny that's with the Cobra Kai series that followed that makes his character so rich ultimately. But in this film, it's funny. And he gets his ass kicked again, right? This is the one where literally Johnny is going to kill him.
Yeah.
Right?
There is
like
sense.
He's running away, and Johnny is like, this is the, you've done enough, Johnny. It's like, no mercy. You heard Sensei. We got to just like beat him to death. Right.
Yeah.
And so Miyagi intervenes, and he trashes these like Cobra Kais in a hot second. Right.
Yeah. It's awesome.
And this leads to probably the first most important scene is like, I'm accepting you, like I'm taking you on, right? And it's a bit begrudgingly. And I think what was interesting is this is the first time he calls him Daniel-san, right? And I was like, oh, I've never researched what the honorific san means, right? And in Japanese, it's kind of like a Mr. or Mrs. or Miss kind of honorific, but the more you read it was, but technically it's mostly used like you would with in English last names. And when it's used with first names, it's kind of a way of like indicating you're now in the in group, right? Like we're familiar. And that I think is kind of cool that he indicates that. But he doesn't want, he's also hesitant. So, cause he pushes back.
Who pushes back?
Miyagi does, because remember, what does Danny? They're talking about how to deal with the kids, like the Cobra Kai, because he's getting his ass kicked endlessly, and he's like, you got to deal with this.
Let me think. I don't remember.
Oh, so this is where basically Miyagi says, we got to go to the dojo. You should go to the dojo, right? And he's like, that's
the best.
And Miyagi's like. And he's like, yeah, you should do that. And then he's like, yeah, we should do that. And he's like, no, not we. But he does acquiesce and says, fine, I'll go with you.
That character might be my favorite. I think the scene goes something like, and if he doesn't show up, then it's open season on him and you. And I was like, that is awesome. And he's so intimidating.
Oh,
and
Reese,
He just exudes pain and suffering and a certain amount of vengeance and malice. I love him.
Yeah. So the idea is like Miyagi's solution to end the beating is like, let's talk to them. Let's use our voices, like, because he's trying to say like, teach me karate. It's like
your voice, Daniel.
Yeah. And he's like, no, use your voice, dude. And he's like, okay. And so which leads to, because Miyagi convinces him he should go talk to them, which leads to Danny convincing Miyagi. It's like, well, you need to be there. I can't go by myself. And Miyagi acquiesces begrudgingly at first. And so they go, and this is the scene where, you know, Martin Cove, and to watch his audition of this, it's kind of cool because there's a great audition tape of this scene, right? And it's kind of amazing because he's like pretty intimidating in the audition tape, and it's in like it's in Alverson's living room, right? The audition, and he talks about being like Alverson had been such a dick, and he said come over, and like he'd been rehearsing this for a couple months, and then he said like, yeah, I need you to come right now, and if you don't come, like that's it. And so he was actually really pissed off going into the audition. He thought he was like being a big dick. And he had been super excited. This is a guy who fucking directed like Rocky, right? And so he's like really excited as an actor to get this opportunity. And so the audition tape's interesting because you're like, oh yeah, that's Kreese. But then to watch the scene and how he ratchets him up, like the director or the and you're just like, it blows my mind, like to see the craftsmanship of stuff like that. Because, you know, he's so menacing, right?
God.
And so he's our other quote unquote father figure we have to talk about. And so to kind of tee this off, you know, Billy Zabka talks a lot about his character. First, number one, super funny in this documentary. He talks about how when he's reading this script and he's first getting to role play Johnny, he said, this is kind of me. He basically admits he was kind of a frat boy dick, you know, going into this. Like, it was so easy to play this role. It was basically me. I was like,
yeah,
oh
and he's from Northridge, like he's from like just that part of the valley, like
right.
You could see it.
And he also talks about like he feels justified being like a shit to Danny because he's stealing his ex-girlfriend, right? It's like he deserves it, so Danny deserves this. But it comes from the Kreese character, who's this super charismatic, menacing Vietnam vet, right?
The best, yeah.
And in the very first time we meet him, we get like his whole cult mantra. It's this: fear does not exist in this dojo. No sensei. It's the whole group. Pain does not exist in this dojo. No sensei. Defeat does not exist in this dojo. No sensei. You know. It's just incredible.
Like, what do we study here? The way of the fist.
Yeah.
And what is that way? Strike first, strike hard, no mercy. And that no mercy keeps on coming up again and again.
Yeah, and so, but he's clearly created this space where these boys all just have bought into this scene, right? And Johnny's character is the leader of that group, and they're just like a bunch. And he talks about it. It's like we're basically like a bunch of frat boy assholes, right? And so Kreese becomes this character who you're just like, man, I'm glad I did not. Or it's like, imagine if this guy was your dad. Like, how tough would you be? How fucked up would you be, right? How much of a weapon would you be? And so part of you is like, ooh, that'd be kind of cool. So you can.
All the therapy, you know.
Yeah. One would need. And that's the thing. It's like the subsequent Cobra Kai, you know, show is one giant 6-season therapy session for the Johnny character that he needs to get over what happened, which is kind of remarkable.
It's great. I mean, the way they spin out Johnny and, you know, fully flesh out what is already a very interesting character. I mean, Johnny's one of the great kind of villains of the 80s when it comes to like 80s high school films. Like, he's a compelling figure.
Yeah.
I like that he runs over the radio. He's so pissed at her early on the beach. He's like,
I just wanted to talk to you, exactly. You know, to the Alley character. And yeah, so I mean, it's really interesting that, you know, that they would see this as unmined territory. The villain becomes, and so I mean, it's interesting you might as well just talk about it here rather than like, oh, and how there's like obviously many spin-offs, and sequels, but this spin-off is kind of remarkable because, you know, so we know in the film Johnny's defeated, Cobra Kai's whole ethos is defeated, right? And it's because it's this no mercy. It's about pain. You know, there's nothing that matters other than you winning, right? And that was another 80s trope, this idea of those that aspire to just win and by any means must be taken down, right? And like, and this goes all the way up into the early '90s with like Wall Street, the film, the Oliver Stone film. Like this message must be hammered into maniacally by this generation that actually turns into a bunch of Dr. No's themselves, which is so fucked up, right? It's like, where did this script get flipped? So, John Kreese. Interesting, like, so Johnny is so devastated by this, and his family, his mother dies. Later on, we learn from the Cobra Kai season, and it starts with he's just like a loser.
It's the best. I mean, it's great.
And you
It's
watch
a really
the first
compelling
season.
switch.
It's a really compelling switch, and Ralph Macchio's character, he's like he's a car salesman, but really successful, really well liked in the community. You get a free bonsai tree with every car you buy from him.
And Johnny is in a apartment building similar to where
oh yeah, that's
Danny
right.
lived, right? So like it's complete role reversal, right?
Correct.
Danny becomes kind of this successful figure. He's watching out for his kids, right? He's not necessarily a jerk like Johnny, although there's pieces of that. But you find yourself rooting for Johnny right away. And I think you even find yourself rooting for the Cobra Kai kids at the end of Karate Kid because you realize they're being brainwashed by Kreese. And you realize that, they're just kids. They're impressionable. There's an adult behind this, like you said, this terrible father, that is kind of indoctrinating them into the way of the fist and not the way of balance and life. And it's not about winning. It's about like living a good life and living a balanced life. And there's a Zen hippie. There's like a hippie, versus the Vietnam vet kind of like, there's an interesting another piece here is like,
yeah, that's true.
The Vietnam vet figure is such a complex one. Right. And like whether or not they're this downtrodden, never appreciated for what they had done as they served abroad, or they come back just cold-blooded killers. Right. Or like, so there's that figure, and this kind of trope of the Vietnam vet played out in Kreese is real. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. And so, it is interesting, like literally that it's this something that this Johnny character has to resolve, and the way that he resurrects Cobra Kai and he tries so hard to still at first just be like, it's going to be the same strike first, and it's painted on the wall and stencil, strike first, strike hard, no mercy. Like he's trying to bring it back and be Kreese. But the funny thing, the rationale for doing it is to try to help kids that are bullied, right? To help the Ralph Macchios, to help the Tony Russos to find a way to defend themselves. So it's not the Kreese model, but he's trying. It's like, what am I? And the whole series ultimately becomes this idea of this blending. And I love how it's the tropes of blending of karate styles and kung fu styles is how you the only way you can win. It's like one of my favorite kung fu movies of all time is this story of the son who gets revenge on his father's death by the Pad Mai character. The Pia Mai or whatever, and it's because he blends his mother's crane style with his father's tiger style, right? And it's the blending of styles is how from our parents, right? What we take from our parents, the bad one, and these because Tony Russo becomes his sensei in this series eventually. I was watching the recap. I have not watched past the first season, but he becomes his sensei. So he blends the Miyagi-Do dojo. Karate with the and he creates he gets kicked out of Cobra Kai, but that's another thing. But it's these blending of styles, and that's his resolution is allowing multiple sides of his personality to resolve his character. Which,
I don't know when Eagle Fang comes up, but that's my favorite thing of the whole series is there's an Eagle Fang.
Yeah, so Eagle Fang becomes Miyagi Fang, and there's a lot of blending. It's really great.
Eagle Fang. I think I brought my son a shirt that's like Eagle Fang.
Eagle Fang, that sounds awesome. Yeah, I want one of those. Please send me one. So, I mean, that's like kind of our side, and it is important to recognize like this is this idea of how, because we've talked about this, it's the family that you make. It's not always your parents that make you who you are. Like I think The Outsiders was a big part of that. And this is a different version of that. And so Miyagi is this wonderful, beloved, father figure, and which is also great because he's misunderstood initially too. And I think that's kind of where this all comes to, is this story of how Miyagi, through labor, the kind of labor he must have gone through as a kid, like his father, my favorite thing is like, Danny Russo's like, how did you learn to do this? Father taught me.
Yeah.
Right. Everything is like, father taught me. Right. And it's like, I thought he was a fisherman. One thing true about Miyagi is fish and karate. And it's a father teach. And so he's given this opportunity to take Daniel-san under his wing and have a child, because we learn later on he lost his family, right?
That's a great scene too. When, Daniel walks in, I think Daniel had his own run-in with Johnny. So Johnny took advantage of Daniel picking up Ali at the country club again.
Right.
That whole
class thing, yeah.
Class thing, and he sees Johnny and Ali kissing, and Johnny had forced himself on Ali in order to piss Daniel off. He runs away. He kind of makes a mess, and everybody laughs at him, which is always great. So then
the rich people laughing at the poor kid. It's
Exactly.
the classic. It's like
So
another
good.
John Hughes classic, right?
So then he goes back to Miyagi, right, to kind of get some consolation and kind of whatever. And Miyagi's freaking bombed,
Yeah.
right? And he basically finds out about Miyagi's backstory.
Right. And it's interesting. In the research, I found out like the studio wanted to cut this scene out, right? And this is the scene that basically gets Pat Morita an Academy Award nomination, if you think about it, right?
Yeah.
Because he gets nominated as a supporting actor. And, it's probably really interesting scene for him to perform, because Pat Morita as a child was put in one of the Japanese internment camps during World War II. And so the story is that Pat Morita's character's wife and a pregnant wife is put in an internment camp while he's serving in Germany, earning with valor the highest honor you can win in combat, which is the Medal of Honor. Like literally there's less than 100 that have been given out in the history of the United States. So that it's like an unbelievable kind of honorific to be given to any soldier. And so he's finding these things out. And at the same time, he's totally drunk, which is the best part about it. And he's saying, Danny, drink with me. And he's like, what?
Yeah.
And he's like,
the permissive nature of the 80s is interesting, right? Because it's like, I don't have a license. You don't have a license. Can you drive me? Right? Like there's like that whole thing where like, it's fine to drive without a license, just
right.
use your head.
Or just like, let's do shots of sake together.
And it's interesting too, because obviously this is where the movie kind of veers into some serious historical topics, right? Like that are like deep and profound. And you understand, Miyagi as the other, even though he is this figure, people treat him as the other. He kind of gets discounted, right? The Asian American kind of like invisible, don't see them. Mm-hmm. He's obviously more apparent here, but there's this kind of also bond between him as, this figure, this othered figure here in California, and then this kind of New York Italian, right? The LaRusso is very important. His Italianness is very important. The otherness of LaRusso is interesting versus the WASP rich. You think about the parents of Ali and the country club, right? It's very, very kind of, homogenous in this kind of, and these two bond also, I think, in their otherness as opposed to everything surrounding them. If you want to look at it from the class and social kind of, friction of the two.
But the other way, it's not just, it is that in this, there are others, but they're also, it's great because he's also suddenly for the first time fallible. This is the man, like we've kind of jumped past the wax on, wax off scenes that he's taught him the fundamentals of the karate defense through a bunch of like, menial labor exercises. But he's a fallible parent. And that I found incredibly interesting too. It's like this idea of when a child for the first time recognizes their parent as just a human being, not the person who's like making you do your chores or trying to take care of you when you're sick or, giving you crap because you don't want to do your homework or whatever. Or you're like forcing you to wash 1,000, or paint, 400 yards of fence front and back, They're this person who have their own problems, and suddenly you're like, wow, they have the problems I do, right? And that's the connection you're making. It's like there are these outsider characters that are marginalized, and he's seeing him in that light for the first time. And Ralph Macchio talks about that being his favorite, one of his favorite scenes. That and the birthday party, which is amazing, right? And the bow, he's bowing to him, like seeing him. It's this way. It's like the Avatar. I see you, in this moment.
What's the birthday party scene again?
Oh, the birthday party is right. It's basically the night before the culminating the final scene.
Gotcha.
Right? And so
when
it's funny.
He gives him the car and gotcha.
Yeah, and it's like this connection is finally complete between them, and so yeah, I mean, just to describe that a bit more completely, he brings a birthday cake out to him, and and there all those things have happened. We're totally glossing over it. It's so funny. Everybody would want to probably talk endlessly about all the chores, and part of it is like, I don't care. It's like, yeah, this is his funky way of teaching him to karate. Is like, you're weak and you need to go through hard labor to learn what it means to be tough. And that's his approach as a kid, probably what his parent probably made. It was like, you learn toughness through delivering newspapers since like age 8 to 18. That's my toughness, is like trudging through snows 365 days a year for like 8 years of my life, which is psychotic, And so that was his same thing. But anyway, the birthday party, so the tournament is about to happen. And this is where like, he's going to get his ass kicked for the rest of his life in this town, or he's going to get some respect. And he gives him his first, what is the name of the outfit? I forgot to write it down. Did you write it down? What's the name of the outfit, the karate outfit?
No, I didn't write it down, but that's the classic one with the sun on the back of it.
Yeah, and it's also a symbol of his family, right? Because it was made by his wife. And so this is their, like, you are my family now. And this is where Ralph Macchio is just killing it. Like, he's just like, no way. But at the same time, so appreciative, and the earnestness of their bond together in those moments are so good. And he gives him the car too, right?
Which is pretty awesome. That, I don't know if that's like one of those Tucker cars or whatever, but they're just these beautiful, it's 50s, 40s.
It was a 1947 yellow Ford Coupe, and Ralph Macchio has it still.
Oh, get out of here.
Yeah, he still has it. He talked in the documentary. He described it. It's like he has it to this day. That car.
How cool is that?
Yeah. And so this is the moment, and I think to me this is he literally calls him his best friend at this moment, right? In that scene where they're talking about balance, and at the same time he's like, hey, go find your girlfriend, man. That's what this is about, right? Yeah. And we haven't really even talked about. I mean, I guess we should to a little kind of. I mean, the culminating fight, but just before we get there, the Allie character and Elizabeth Shue, and it's kind of interesting to think about Elizabeth Shue. She's probably the most successful actor out of this entire troupe. And there's a lot of wonderful people, but she goes on to win an Academy Award as for Leaving Las Vegas with Nick Cage, and Adventures in Babysitting, and even most recently, like, I loved her first season. Did you ever watch Gen V, Gen V's the Amazon show about the superheroes that are basically a big corporate behemoth.
Oh yeah, what's that called? Like The Boys?
Yeah, The Boys.
Yeah.
And so she was awesome in the first season of The Boys. So she's just this incredible actress, and she gets this role of being. Yeah, I mean, she knows she's from the other side of the tracks, but she's interested in earnestly interested in his character and in Anthony Russo. But I appreciate her, and it's so funny. In the second season, there's two things that happen: is the car breaks down and he loses Allie. like in the sequel, and you're like, okay, I guess they didn't last.
She got better offers.
Yeah, or she just went to college. It would make sense.
Yeah.
Like they would easily just grow apart instantly. He doesn't end up going to college because he's not meant to. Like, he strikes you as a kid that might try like a couple semesters at one of the community colleges in the California state system or something like that. And maybe get some business courses because he's like, oh, I got to do this. And maybe he gets through. He ends up getting his degree. But Allie's like definitely off in the East Coast going to Wesleyan or something like that.
Totally.
And so it makes sense that they would fall apart. And so that's why like their scenes together are wonderful, classic 80s teen romance stuff. And their stuff in the arcade is probably the best of that.
Oh yeah, when you have those race cars, they're doing the go-karts, they're doing the bumper boats, they're in the trampoline.
Right.
Oh yeah, it's awesome. I mean,
so
it's just great.
Yeah, and it's such a great portrait of first love, but it's not like the overarching, even though they make it a teen romance as well. That's kind of a sidecar, clearly, to the Pat Morita, to the Miyagi Danielson story, which culminates in the fight. What did you love about the final? Even though, because this is like you're putting your kid out to get his ass kicked.
Yeah, I mean, so this is interesting to me. This is, I mean, the final, like the competition, right? The All Valley, under 18, who's going to be the karate champion of the Valley? Great setup for them to meet because that's where they finally kind of, reconcile their differences. But I wrestled in high school, and in high school on Long Island, they had this thing called, the counties. And it was very similar. They'd have all these mats set up and people would come together and they would wrestle, and you'd have all these different wrestling matches. And it was kind of this, and then you'd go and you'd look at the brackets and then here's who I wrestle next. And it was kind of exciting, and people would be in the stands and, as it get, more and more kind of fewer and fewer contestants, right? You would be like, a bigger and bigger kind of impact on who was going to take the counties. Being a county champion, was a very big deal because that means you went to the states and you wrestled for the states. And if you win the states, you're kind of, a godhead. So this is kind of what's happening here. And I just loved how efficiently the director dealt with this. I mean, you got to see like 6 or 7 karate matches and kind of get a real sense of them in about 5 or 6 minutes. It was like boom, 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 boom. And like you got these like cheap shots on the leg and the whole thing. But obviously the most famous scene maybe of the movie is the crane shot, right?
Sure.
And then there's someone in the background who I love. Get him a body bag.
Put him in a body bag,
That's my
Johnny.
favorite line of the whole movie.
Yeah.
And so just really well done. As a director, this whole scene I thought was just brilliantly done and compelling and what everything has been pushing towards, and it nails it.
Yeah. Billy Zabka and Pat Morita both described how like Alvidson hid cameras all over this set, right? And so they could capture action from different points of view, and the talent didn't really have to engage blocking and performing for the camera. And there were 500 extras, and Billy says his parents were in the crowd as extras, right? And there's this moment where everybody's booing Johnny, and he looks up and he sees his mom is crying because this crowd's all booing him. And it's kind of a remarkable setup, and we have this scene where I can't remember which of the frat boys, the Cobra Kai guys, like take out his knee, like, and he gets disqualified for it.
It's not McQueen.
No, it's not
awesome.
McQueen.
That's Dutch is Steve McQueen's son.
Oh, Chad. Yeah. Chad McQueen. Yeah, literally. Yeah.
That's crazy.
But yeah, and you can see like he's there. His mom is in the stand, and Pat Morita's there. Miyagi's there, and he's calling for him. And this thing that's this final determination of what does it mean to be a man? Conversation between a boy and his mentor / father. And it's like, I can't do this without pushing one more time. Like, you have to help me push this. I don't want to be the one that's going to be still laughed at. They'll still be on me. And so we get the whole like, moment and which is all just hooey, but it's awesome.
It's
and
like,
it comes
cut
out
me,
in fights.
Mick. Cut me.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And all the beats of Rocky, the final scene of Rocky happen.
Exactly.
Which is really kind of remarkable. It's like, okay, you're going back to the well clearly here, right? Like he punches him out or kicks him his face and wins, right? Though in Rocky he doesn't win, but the best part about Rocky at the end is like when Creed. So we have Johnny finally acquiescing to like Kreese is like a dick, and I should just make amends with Danny, and he brings the trophy to him, and he's like, "You're a good kid." And it instantly made me think of Rocky, and Creed's like, goes to him. It's like, there's not gonna be a rematch. He's like, I don't want him in. It's like, no, don't want one, right?
Yeah, that's right. Ain't gonna be no rematch.
Ain't gonna be no rematch. Don't want one, right?
It's true though, but it's also, I have to say, the movie is a little bit disappointing at that last moment in that Johnny comes and he kind of says, you're all right, kid. Like, that's what it had all been about. But then, Machio is all like,
yeah.
He's not like triumphant. He's all
he's not
beaten up and kind of like.
It's somewhat to his character, though, in some ways. Like, because he has an attitude, right? Like his character has an attitude, but he's also incredibly vulnerable. Like he's literally taken many, many beatings, and he's in this tournament been like. He probably has like torn ligaments, right?
Yeah.
And so yeah, it's funny. Like the thing, if to not stop comparing it to Rocky, what makes Rocky ending so amazing is that, and compelling, is that he's just calling out for Adrian. Like that's all he cares about, right? Yeah. It's the winning, and this is the whole Johnny, post-mortem of 6 seasons of Cobra Kai. It's about having people that you care about. It's not whether you win or lose. It's who you care about. I mean, in Karate Kid, they're like, well, it's a teen thing, so we got to have him just win, right? Where Rocky, it's about I found love, and so he looks to Mr. Miyagi, and then there's the nod from Mr. Miyagi, and I guess that's their best they can do in that moment. But just like Rocky, the movie's just over,
Yeah,
it's like
it's really quick.
Yeah,
and I was like, oh, there's going to be the whole scene where Kreese turns on his students.
Yeah.
But that's not until Karate Kid 2, but I just basically conflated. I was like, oh, that's going to happen.
Right. No,
But it doesn't. So it's very interesting in that's how Rocky 2 starts, right? Rocky 2 starts right off of Rocky 1. They go to the hospital, right? And they're kind of dealing with that. So it's interesting. Like there are so many similarities. And I think like Sylvester Stallone is like, yeah, they just took Rocky and redid it for Karate Kid. And there's some truth to that,
Sure. Especially in that culminating scene. So, I mean, and you wouldn't think this is ultimately a family pictures podcast, but I think it's on theme. Like the single mother thing would be the obvious choice, but she's not that big a character. But the Pat Morita playing this father figure and doing it in a way that's surprisingly compelling, right? And that's the ultimate, I think, they talk about in the documentary, like this is in Johnny's interview or Billy Zabka's interview is probably my favorite part, where he's just like, he realized really early on, like how magical this little cast was and how Alvidson was so successful in bringing together this group of people to play these roles, and everybody just seemed to inhabit them perfectly. And so, because of that rapport that Pat Morita and Ralph Macchio had, I think is what just like takes it over the top and makes it incredibly enjoyable. And I'm so glad we did it.
Yeah. So successful, a franchise, like one of those. And it's still like, even the Cobra Kai, when you introduced me to it in 2018, I was like, really? Karate Kid? But then I watched Cobra Kai and me and my family were hooked. We're like, this is great. You know what I mean? So like, there's something about it that, kept on giving, so cool.
Yeah. So Karate Kid. So we're back. I don't know what we're doing next.
We'll do something.
Thanks for coming back to the Family Picture Podcast, and we'll see you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.